Hey guys, thanks for getting through the last few weeks. I think everybody's caught up on everything. Please email me if you've had any problems or any questions. If you've missed any assignments, please email me and I'll see what we can do about making those up. I don't want anybody to get behind. We only have a few lectures left. This semester's winding down. Today we're going to talk about interest groups. Next week we will talk about voting, campaigns, and elections, and you will have your fourth and final quiz. The following week, we will do media, power, and political communication, which I believe is the week of Thanksgiving. So I'll post the lecture like I do on Monday mornings, or late Sunday night. And then that'll be it for your lectures. So you just have 3 more lectures today, next week, and the next week. The following week, your essay is due Monday, November 29th. Everything is set up for that. I've had a few questions about that. If you're having trouble finding a book as a source, you can use an online resource as long as it is a credible source. Not like Wikipedia or something. You guys know what a credible source is. And then, of course, our final exam is November the 6th. And that's when it will be due on November the 6th. Or December the 6th. So I will likely post it the same day that your essay is due, and it will be due on December 6th because I've got to get your grades in. Okay, so let's dig in. You have 3 lectures left, and this one we're going to talk about today, this week, interest groups. Your textbook actually starts out with a really funny example. It talks about in 1994, when they first started talking about healthcare reform, there were these commercials that came out where they had this couple called Harry and Louise, and they were like featured discussing their fears about like a government-run healthcare. And so an apprehensive public was really persuaded that government involvement in healthcare would mean that they would lose their freedom about what doctor they wanted to see or what care to receive, because it fit into this pre-existing narrative about the dangers of big government. So that was 1994. Clinton was president, and he really failed to counter this effectively, and the healthcare industry scored a major victory. Healthcare reform was dead, and for at least the next 16 years. So when Obama decided that he was going to take on healthcare reform, he really had to figure out how to do this. And so he really thought about it and thought the lessons from this failure in 1994 were that he first needed to get Congress involved from the start, and second, he needed to do something to bring the relevant interest groups to the table, like the healthcare industry. He wanted to make sure that Harry and Louise kind of didn't kill Obamacare the way that they did in 1994. But what was really at stake in him consorting with the enemy to get it done? Was it bringing healthcare groups into the reform process early to prevent them from defining reform in a negative way? Was that too great to bear? Sorry, the light is hitting me in a weird place. Hopefully I can see you guys. French observer Alexis de Tocqueville, I don't know how to say that, I didn't take French, noted the peculiar tendency for Americans to join forces with their friends, neighbors, and colleagues. He said that Americans of all ages, all conditions, all dispositions constantly form associations. How true is that? They not only have commercial and manufacturing companies in which all take part, but associations of thousands of other kinds: religious, moral, serious, futile, general or restricted, enormous or diminutive. And now with social media, we're connected in ways he could have never imagined. This didn't really specifically refer to factions, which we've talked about, but Madison had already noted the American propensity to form political associations or factions, which factions are a group of citizens united by some common passion or interest and opposed to the rights of other citizens or the interests of the whole community. We've talked about that. Madison feared that factions would weaken and destabilize a republic, but he also believed, as he argued in Federalist Number 10, that a large republic could contain the effects of factions by making it hard for potential members to find one another, and by providing for so many political groups that if they did find each other and organize, their very numbers would cancel each other out. Modern political scientists call factions interest groups, which are organizations of individuals who share a common political goal and unite for the purpose of influencing government decisions. Parties also seek to influence policy, but they do so by sponsoring candidates in elections and running governments. Political scientists don't believe that all interest groups are opposed to the broad public interest the way that Madison thought they were. Instead, they hold that interest groups can play an important role in our democracy ensuring that the views of organized interests are heard in the governing process. Interest groups play a central role. Sorry, that light is hitting me so weird. Interest groups play a central role in a pluralist theory of democracy, which argues that democracy is enhanced when citizens' interests are represented through group membership. That group interaction ensures that members' interests are represented, but that almost no group can become too powerful. Interest groups have almost always existed, but they really weren't a major force until the beginning of the 20th century, when progressive reformers opened up the political process to the people. Political parties were weakened and interest groups were correspondingly strengthened. By the 1960s, DC was full of interest group activity as the federal government continued to expand the New Deal and Great Society programs, and this has continued still. Is it worse if I do it this way? Yes, way worse. Is that better? There we go. Interest groups accelerated after 1971 when the Federal Election Campaign Act was passed in the effort to curb campaign spending abuses. Seeking to regulate the amount of money an interest group could give to candidates for federal office, the law provided for political action committees, PACs, to serve as fundraisers for interest groups. A PAC, Political Action Committee, is the fundraising arm of an interest group. They're limited in how much they can donate to a candidate, but there are loopholes that allow them to get around a lot of the restrictions. And you've probably heard about some of this. There's something called a super PAC that can spend super PAC being Super Political Action Committee, can spend unlimited amounts of money on a candidate's behalf, but they're not allowed to coordinate their efforts with those of a candidate's campaign. Many PACs are creatures of interest groups, but others are independent and act as interest groups in their own right. PACs have become extremely powerful players in American politics. They contribute a substantial portion of candidates' campaign funds. But just how much campaign money should be supplied by outside groups, and to what extent does it obligate a candidate to do a group's bidding? That really became an issue in 2016. Madison would probably roll over in his grave with the explosion of interest groups' activities today. He thought he'd secured the Republic against the mischiefs of faction, and he couldn't have imagined a world where mass transportation and communication systems would shrink the size of the large Republic he believed would isolate groups. Critics argue that interest groups have too much power and that they unduly influence officials who want their financial support. They don't effectively represent the interests of groups that don't organize, like the poor, the homeless, the young. And they clog up the vital arteries of American democracy, leading to gridlock and stagnation. Supporters also echo Madison's pluralist hopes that group politics can preserve political stability by containing and regulating conflict and by providing checks on any one group's power. They argue that interest groups have a positive role to play in the democratic process. Interest groups do play a significant role in determining who gets what in American politics. Why do people join groups? Most of us know of public problems that we think should be addressed. Maybe a pothole that needs filling, a street that's too dark at night, tuition is too high. But we rarely act together to solve these problems. We don't really organize a group, and we sometimes don't even join one. The collective action problem is the difficulty in getting people to work together to achieve a common goal when the solution is costly and no one individual has the incentive to use resources to make it happen. These often involve a collective good, which is a good or service that by its very nature cannot be denied to anyone who wants to consume it. Safe roads, public safety, better education, sustainability of the planet. These are collective goods that, once produced, can be enjoyed by anyone. It's difficult to persuade people to join a group because they're going to reap the benefits anyway. There's something called a free rider. People who refuse to spend time, money, or effort on the collective solution because they can reap the benefits whether they join or not. The larger number of people involved, the more this holds true because each one will have trouble seeing that his or her efforts make a difference. We talk about this a lot in law school. You guys are getting so much law school this semester. The common problem or threat. Most interest groups are organized around shared interest, but a lot of people who share interests don't come together at all. A key triggering mechanism for forming an interest group is maybe a disturbance in the political, social, or economic environment that threatens the members of a group or alerts them that they need to organize to protect their interests through political action. The formation of one group often triggers the formation of the group on the opposite side. So some groups form more easily even without an external threat, and the resources available seem to be key. More money means better websites, social networking campaigns, publicity, legal assistance, professional lobbying that helps get the message to DC. And those with greater resources also tend to understand the political process and have the confidence to express their views. The sun, guys, I'm sorry. Have the confidence to express their views and appreciate the value of organizing. Effective and charismatic leaders can help spur the formation of an interest group, and an interest group entrepreneur is crucial to a group's organization, no matter what the resources are. These folks shoulder much of the initial burden and the cost of organizing the group, and they can convince the others in the group they'll be successful. Like Ralph Nader, he founded a lot of consumer interest groups. Candy Lightner founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Groups frequently use selective incentives to induce people to join. These are benefits that are only available to group members as an inducement to get them to join. So they can be material benefits, solidary benefits, or expressive benefits. Material benefits would be like a tangible reward. Like maybe a group publishes a magazine about issues important to that group. Sometimes there are group activities, group benefits. The NRA sponsors a hunting competition. The Sierra Club offers a nature trek. Solidary benefits are selective incentives in forms of a tangible reward. So some people find an intangible reward, sorry. Some people find politics enjoyable and the social interactions satisfactory, making a strong motivating force, and that making it a strong motivating force. They can be like going to a local chapter meeting, going on a lobbying mission to DC. A significant point here is that the interest groups provide the venue through which friendships are made and social interactions occur. I represent a number of different boards that are volunteers who are members of these boards. They do it because they're really interested in politics and they enjoy the trips to DC. They enjoy the conversations with me about what's happening in DC. These are called solidary benefits. They are intangible rewards. And then expressive benefits. These are selective incentives that derive from the opportunity to express values and beliefs and be committed to a greater cause. The rewards that come from doing something that you strongly believe in, from affiliating yourself with a purpose to which you're really committed, essentially from the expression of your values and interests, maybe like the national right to life, believing passionately in making abortions illegal. A membership in this group is a way of expressing your ideas and views. Interest groups, are integral, but they're also a curse on the system. Or are they a curse on the system, like Madison thought? They play important roles in political representation and participation. They educate people, they build agendas, they monitor programs, they give program alternatives. It's possible that the most important thing about you is not where you live, but the congressional representation pretty much sticks our interests as they're related to home, right? So interest groups are going to help represent your views to DC. You're going to join a group of something that matters to you. This is kind of where lobbying comes in. That's what I do. Lobbying is an interest group's activities aimed at persuading policymakers to support the group's position. It's the central activity of interest groups and encompasses a variety of ways to bring pressure to bear on government. There are opportunities to participate in the government, but they're limited by the Constitution. Interest groups provide an avenue for citizen participation in politics that goes beyond voting. Sometimes individual political action seems futile, so channeling efforts through a group can be more effective. Education. Interest groups have an important role to educate policymakers regarding issues that are important to them. Members of Congress deal with a lot, and they can't be an expert on anything. We often would say we are 6 feet wide, 6 inches deep. We know a little bit about a lot, but not a lot about a little. Interest groups often fill this void by providing details and hearings and briefings on issues about which they're often the experts. They also help with agenda building. Interest groups work to get the issues they care about onto the agendas of DC and make them a high priority for action. Provision of program alternatives. Once they're on a program agenda, interest groups often supply alternative suggestions on how they should be dealt. From this mix, political actors suggest a solution. And then program monitoring. Once a law is enacted, interest groups keep tabs on their consequences and inform Congress and regulatory agencies about their effects, intended and unintended. This helps the government decide whether to continue to change a policy and keeps politicians accountable by ensuring someone is paying attention. So types of interest groups. There are potentially as many interest groups out there as there are interests. Endless, right? So it's helpful to divide them into different types based on what kind of benefit they seek for their members. And these are economic, equal opportunity, public, and government. Economic interest groups are obviously groups that organize to influence the government for policy for economic benefit of their members. Higher wages, lower taxes, bigger government subsidies, more favorable business regulations. They're all focused on pocketbook issues. Corporations and business associations, government plays a big role in regulating the economy and defining the ground rules for economic competition. So 70% of interest groups have their own lobbies in DC are higher professionals or business related. Y'all, the sun is so bright. I've got the blinds closed even. Their issues are primarily taxes, labor, and regulatory issues, but they can also be education, welfare reform, and health insurance. Unions and professional organizations. Interest groups a lot of times organize in response to each other. Labor unions don't really have the same force that they once did, but they're still formidable, especially at the state level. Public employees are another large segment of America's, gosh, this is so bad, I'm sorry, America's union represented workforce. The American Federation of Government Employees, teachers, firefighters, police workers, postal workers, everybody has large unions that wield significant influence. Many occupations that require special training or education have formed a special professional associations like the American Medical Association. They lobby to lower maybe a malpractice award or something like that. And then agricultural interest groups. Farming is interesting because everybody depends on food, but it's also subject to things like climate and other forces beyond our control. So the United States has long subsidized, God, it's crazy. I'm so sorry. There we go. Has long subsidized and related agriculture to keep food at affordable levels. Less than 2% of the American workforce is involved in farming, but there's a large network of interest groups that pursue policies favorable to agriculture. And then equal opportunity interest groups. These are groups that organize to promote civil and economic rights of the underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. Some of these are going to be like age, which is one of the fastest growing segments of our population, is the people composed 65 and older. The AARP was established in 1961, and has nearly 38 million members because it only takes $16 a year to be a member, and they enjoy a lot of benefits. Race and ethnicity. The NAACP, founded in 1909, has a long history of fighting segregation and promoting the cause of equal opportunity for African Americans. Gender. The National Organization for Women, the largest group dealing with the equal treatment of women. It's a lightning rod for controversy among women because of the strong women's reproductive rights support. Sexual orientation. The sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s brought gay and lesbian groups formed to fight discriminatory laws and practices based on sexual orientation. And then public interest groups. These are groups that organize to influence government to produce collective goods or services that help the general public. So, for example, the benefits of clean air are available to all. The sun is so nuts. The benefits of the clean air are available to all, but not just the members of the group that fought them. So they're usually motivated by a view of the world that they think everyone else would be better off if they adopted. They believe the benefit they seek is good for everyone, even if individuals outside the group may disagree or reject the benefit. Environmental groups. Starting with Earth Day in 1970, environmental groups have been actively engaged in promoting environmental policies. Clean Air and Water Acts, Endangered Species Acts, creation of the EPA. Consumer groups. Ralph Nader and his Public Citizen became synonymous with the cause of consumer protectionism early on. He exposed the hazard of a variety of consumer products. Religious groups. Obviously, religion and religious groups have had a long history of interest group activity dating back to the abolitionist movement. They respond to what they describe as the moral decay of American society. The Christian Coalition is a powerful religious fundamentalist group that lobbies on political issues and provides members with voter guides. Second Amendment groups. The NRA is opposed to almost any efforts to control and regulate the sale and distribution of firearms. And then, of course, Everytown for Gun Safety was founded opposing that in the wake of the Sandy Hook massacre. Reproductive right groups. The Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade in 1973 that guaranteed women the right to abortion generated a lot of interest groups. Pro-choice groups and Planned Parenthood mounted public relations campaigns. There are pro-life groups, Right to Life Committee. these are good illustrations of how interest groups can use courts, like in the Hobby Lobby case in 2014. Argued that Obamacare's requirement that insurance must include birth control coverage violated their religious values because they perceived some forms of birth control as causing early abortions. So that really showed how an interest group can use the courts well. Other public interest groups. The ACLU defends individual rights. They claim to be the nation's guardians of liberty. Animal rights, Humane Society, PETA. Then you have government interest groups. These are groups that represent, they organize to represent foreign or domestic governments and to lobby Congress and the president on their behalf. It's typically very lucrative for a lobbyist from a foreign government to seek to influence foreign policies. So there are a lot of rules about when you can go do this. There we go. But it's a very lucrative lobbying job to lobby for a foreign government. Interest group policies. The term lobbying comes from the 17th century England, where the representatives of special interests would meet the members of the English House of Commons in the large anteroom or lobby outside the Commons to plead their cases. Contemporary lobbying reaches far beyond the lobby of the House or Senate. I live in Lexington, South Carolina, and I am a federal Washington, D.C. lobbyist. Interest groups do contact lawmakers directly. I do it a lot of times via Zoom now, but sometimes in person. But it's no longer confined to chance meetings in the legislative lobby. They target all branches of government, the American people as well. Lobbying is big business, and there are two main types, direct and indirect. Direct lobbying is the direct interaction with public officials for the purpose of influencing policy decisions, sometimes called inside lobbying. Congress is the typical recipient of this. And then indirect lobbying, attempts to influence the government policymakers by encouraging the general public to put pressure on them. This can be like a social movement, a political protest to make your demands heard. When an interest group lobbies Congress, it rarely focuses on all 435 members of the House or 100 members of the Senate. They focus on the congressional committees where the bills are written and revised, or the particular member that you're concerned about at that time. Like I am working on, this is completely not anything you guys would ever care about, a lands bill for Lander County, Nevada right now. And so I am talking to the 2 senators and 1 congressman who care a lot about that, the congressional committees that care a lot about that, the legislative agencies that care a lot about that. So I'm not wasting my time talking to all 535 members. I'm talking mostly to the people that care the most about it, and then having them carry the weight for me in Congress. Strategies for congressional lobbying: personal contacts, appointments, banquets, parties, lunches, simple casual meetings in the hallways of Congress are the most common and effective form of lobbying. Obviously, that had to change a lot during the pandemic. We are not hosting as many parties as we once did. They're still happening a little bit. We had a few recently, but a lot of things, people are a lot more receptive to a Zoom meeting now, which is really nice. You have access to the power and knowledge about how government works, and that's key. And so a lot of former government officials are lobbyists now. In fact, my boss was a former congressman. This is called the revolving door, the tendency of a public official, journalist, or lobbyist to move between a public and private sector media to a lobbying job. They parlay their knowledge and contacts and gathered in lucrative salaries in the private sector. There are some restrictions about how long you have to wait before you can lobby once you've been in public office. A lot of reforms have been tried to be made about this, but it's always going to kind of work this way. A lot of staff members do the same thing. You work on Capitol Hill for a while, and then you go, they call it downtown or to K Street, to go lobby. There are pluses and minuses to that, of course. Expert testimony. Interest groups lobby decision makers by providing testimony and expertise. Sometimes they even draft the legislation on areas where policymakers cannot take the time to become experts. This is valuable and can bring long-term credibility to members of Congress. They give money to Congress also, and that's another lobbying technique that helps gain a friendly ear. There have been some restrictions on that as well. And then coalition forming. Interest groups attempt to bolster their lobbying efforts by forming coalitions with other interest groups. Coalition building is something that I have always prided myself on as a lobbyist. I like to find other people who care about the same issue as me, because the more people who speak it, the louder a voice is heard, right? There have been a lot of attempts to regulate the type relationship between lobbyist and lawmaker. Lawmakers benefit a lot from their relationship with lobbyists, and they're not enthusiastic about curtailing their opportunities to get their money and support. But there have been some reforms made. When you try to directly lobby the president, it's important to have personal contacts within the White House, and the higher up, the better. The official point of contact between the White House interest group is the Office of Public Engagement. Their basic purpose is to foster good relationships between the White House and interest groups. If you want to directly lobby the bureaucracy, winning the legislative battle is only the first step, right? Then you have to go to the bureaucracy, where Congress has delegated the rulemaking authority to the agencies that implement the law. So I was talking about writing a lands bill for Lander County, Nevada. I'm talking to the Bureau of Land Management within the Department of Interior very frequently. You try to develop strong relationships within these regulating agencies. Direct lobbying of the courts. Interest groups try to influence government policy by challenging the legality of a law or administrative regulation in the courts by using groups maybe like the NAACP or the ACLU. Sometimes groups bring cases directly, and sometimes they file them amicus curiae, friend of the court. And then indirectly, the public can lobby as well. One of the most powerful and fastest growing types of lobbying is indirect lobbying. Lobbyists using public pressure to put pressure on politicians to do what they want, like the Harry and Louise case that I started talking about earlier, or the Harry and Louise commercial. A lot of it consists of telling a compelling story and getting the public to buy it, so they react by pressuring government to do what the interest group wants. And then the group focuses on educating the public by disseminating information and research, mobilizing direct citizen lobbying efforts, organizing demonstrations or protests, and then educating the public. This involves building and disseminating a compelling narrative. You want to see things through the preferred frame of the interest group. You need press coverage. Issue advocacy ads, advertisements that support issues or candidates without telling the constituents how to vote. And then you want to mobilize the public. The point of disseminating information is to motivate the public to lobby politicians themselves. On most issues, the general public interest is low, and so interest groups must rely on their own members for support. Some unconventional methods: social protest and mass movement. Social protests are public activities designed to bring attention to a political cause, usually generated by those without access to conventional means of expressing their views. This provides a way for people, often those closed out from more traditional avenues of political action, to publicly disseminate a narrative expressing their disagreement with a government policy or action. And then you have something called grassroots lobbying, which is an indirect lobbying effort that springs from widespread public concern, addresses people in their roles as ordinary citizens. And then think about, what is fake grass? AstroTurf. So AstroTurf lobbying is indirect lobbying efforts that manipulate or create a public sentiment. AstroTurf being artificial grassroots. It's not genuine. Often the line between real grassroots and AstroTurf lobbying is blurred. A movement may be partly spontaneous but partly orchestrated. Interest group resources. Interest group's success depends in large part on the resources that a group can bring to the project of influencing the government. They need money to conduct the business of trying to influence policymakers. They need well-trained staff, campaign contributions. But this doesn't guarantee favorable policies. It's not just money that not having money sometimes just guarantees failure. You need staff to enable an interest group. You need money to enable an interest group to hire professional staff to take care of the day-to-day organizations. Professional assistants. The interest groups need to be able to hire services of professionals like high-powered lobbyists. You need to be able to give money to lots of important people. They need to contribute to the campaigns. An intangible element of the success or failure of an interest group is an effective and charismatic leader. It can help a group organize. An entrepreneur can help a group organize even if it lacks other resources. Membership size is also important, but the level of intensity that members exhibit in support of the group's causes is also critical. And then information. One of the most powerful resources in an interest group's arsenal is information. Although people see problems with loved ones suffering from like lung cancer, etc., it took public health interest groups like the American Cancer Society to conduct studies, collect data, and show connections between the life-threatening illnesses and smoking. You have to really have it matter. Defenders of pluralism believe that interest group formation helps give more power to more citizens. It can certainly enhance democratic life, And it offers more channels for representation, for participation, for education, public agenda building, and defining policy solutions. And it helps keep politicians accountable. Pluralists often also believe that the system as a whole benefits from interest group politics. If no single interest group commands a majority, then interest groups will compete with one another and then immediately must form coalitions to create a majority. Money, leadership, membership, information, this can make an interest group successful, but it also raises danger red flags for democracy. We value political equality, one person, one vote, and anyone who attempts to vote twice on election day will be turned away, no matter how rich that person is, or etc. But policy is not only made at the ballot box, it's made in the halls of Congress, in conference rooms of the bureaucracy, in corporate boardrooms, in private offices, in restaurants, and bars. Interest groups speak loudly here, and they have the equivalent of extra votes in the policymaking process. All right, guys, thanks for hanging in there with this random son of me. Sorry, I'll find a better spot to sit next time. Hang in there. Just a couple more lectures to go. Next week, we'll have a lecture and your fourth and final quiz. And email me if you have any questions. Thanks.